connections with a lot of you folks out there too. And just a statistic, between 22 and 57% of all homeless women report that domestic violence was the immediate cause of their homelessness. And additionally, 38% of all victims of DV survivors become homeless at some point in their lives. And oftentimes a survivor will leave an abuser multiple times before finally escaping the abuse, and therefore they may experience multiple periods of homelessness. So now I'm going to fly over into assessing for fleeing when working with survivors of domestic and sexual violence. So a survivor may call in to you, and they may start sharing a little bit about their experience. And so we want to make sure we first stop, make sure, it's a safe time to talk with them, that they're in a safe place. And if they need medical attention, if they need to have assistance getting to the police department, and then it's always good to get multiple means of contact for a survivor, as they may need to discard a phone. It may not be safe for them to use email. And so just asking them what, if they have other means of communicating, so that way you can stay in touch. And then asking them, is it safe to leave a voicemail, an email? How should I identify myself when I call? Just again, because as they're in fleeing, they may still have some connections with that abusive partner. And then, of course, always offer to provide a referral to the local DV program, which again is their choice if they do or do not want to participate. So as you're working with somebody to really identify if they are immediately fleeing or in need of domestic violence specific housing or domestic violence specific shelter, we want to really work on having a conversation with them. We find that the more open a conversation you can have with them and more open-ended questions, you'll generally get more information, as opposed to just, let's go down A, B, C, D, we have all these questions, let's get on with it kind of. We want to get a timeline of the abuse, so kind of understanding, all right, so you're calling me now, when was the last time there may have been contact with the abuser? Is there an active restraining order in place? Where did you last sleep, for example? And then ask if they feel safe in housing that is not confidential. That may vary between survivor. If they identify they need a confidential shelter or location, you definitely want to direct them our way. But it is possible for survivors to be safe in homeless shelters, especially if the abuse has been some time apart. And working with a crisis center in to safety plan, there is a possibility that they can be safe. And through protective orders and legal support and intervention as well can help somebody become safe to access other programs as well. So this is just sort of an overview. We kind of already scroll through that. The one thing that I will also point out that is a little bit helpful too, if a person talks about, for example, if you ask them what has happened before when you tried to leave, that really kind of gives us an indication. And oftentimes we'll hear a survivor say, the abuser repetitively calls me, he searches for me, he shows up at my place of work. The last time I left, I had to leave in the middle of the night, and he was calling my friends and family and showing up at their house. That's like a real indicator that somebody is actively fleeing. And then just some guidance on confidentiality. At crisis centers, we have really deep confidentiality, and we're covered under a statute called 173C. So in order to communicate with anyone, we need to get a release of information from the survivor. And so we'll be a little bit mysterious, and we might say, like, I cannot confirm or deny, or but so if the best way for us to work together would definitely be in getting a release of information. And then on just in general, working with survivors, avoiding as much of a paper trail as possible. Redact utilize ID codes as opposed to names. Definitely keep locked cabinet if you do have any paperwork. Case notes should be vague and non-identifying. So like having real specifics in your case notes, like the survivor works at T-Bones in Nashua or something like that, for example. That's a little bit too specific. We, can be more general. Ensure that you are using your database's safety guidelines and you're really up to date on what that entails. Definitely getting releases of information. Sometimes family members and friends will call to try to support a survivor. And sometimes they have wonderful intentions and they're very helpful. And then other times, not so much. And we want to make sure that the survivor is in control of how much information is getting out there. And so even if a family member is calling, it's best practice to get a release of information from the survivor to speak with them. But again, up to the survivor how they want to proceed. And then informed consent is ensuring the client knows how their info is being used, how it's being distributed, and make sure you have permission at each step. So if you're going to disclose information out, make sure that you talk to them about, I'm sharing it with Bob at such and such location, and I'm going to share with them this, just so that way permission is really in the forefront. So I talked a little bit about crisis centers. So just a little bit more to this. We provide crisis counseling, support groups. Obviously, we have some housing programs. We also have advocates that support survivors through the court process, whether that be through restraining orders. We're not lawyers, but we can certainly connect to legal resources such as 603 Legal Aid. All advocates, everyone in New Hampshire is a mandated reporter, but we talk to survivors about what that looks like as well. And let's move forward a little bit here. So
wait,
now
so Rachel, can
yes.
I interrupt you for a hot minute?
Absolutely.
Just so all of you know, the New Hampshire Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, as they're a victim service provider, they do not enter into HMIS. They enter into a comparable database, and we have set up a process to ensure there's confidentiality for all participants in that project, in regards to entering them into coordinated entry and to get them onto the prioritization list for housing. And Rachel, I'll let you talk about housing protections.
Yes, definitely. Yes, and so we do go through coordinated entry for our rapid rehousing program, but like Christy said, sorry to open up a bag of worms there, Christy, but yes, exactly what Christy was saying about that. HUD was the Violence Against Women Act was reauthorized in 2022 with some extended protections, but just first off the bat, VAWA is a set of legal rights that survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault have, specifically through public housing programs such as Section 8, rapid rehousing, transitional housing. It's a safe bet that if you're receiving federal funding, especially from HUD, that your programs are going to need to comply to these protections. So basically, some of these protections are that anyone that has experienced domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking is covered through VAWA protections, and they cannot be denied admission or assistance under a HUD subsidized program based off of the fact that they are a survivor. They also cannot be evicted from a HUD program or unit, nor have their assistance terminated, again, because of violence that has been perpetrated against them. And so there's also the option of transfer through VAWA. So if a survivor is in public housing and they experience domestic violence, they can go to their public housing provider and ask for a transfer. They must be allowed to move with continued assistance. And if the survivor has a Section 8 housing choice voucher specifically, they must, so in order to basically gain these protections, a survivor must self-certify using the HUD VAWA self-certification form. This is specifically through public housing, but it stands in general. That basically they need to disclose that they are a survivor. They can disclose whatever information they're willing to do. They can provide a doctor's note, they can provide a restraining order, a letter from a third party, such as a crisis center or a therapist, but they do not need to provide any definitive proof if they do not have that. But they just need to, self-attest that they are a survivor. And then they have to be provided their rights of HUD, basically under VAWA, and they have a right to strict confidentiality of information regarding their status as survivor. So the agency isn't going to be able to disclose their status unless there's again, release of information and permission. What can also happen is through these programs, you can request a lease bifurcation from the owner or landlord to remove the perpetrator from the lease or the unit. And if the housing provider bifurcates, it must be done consistent with applicable federal, state, or local laws and the requirements of the HUD housing programs. Basically, too, survivors cannot be coerced, intimidated, threatened, or retaliated against by a HUD subsidized housing provider for seeking protections under VAWA. They have the right to seek law enforcement or emergency assistance for themselves or others without being penalized by local laws or policies for these requests because they were victims of criminal activity. There's a significant amount of rights and protections, so it could be really helpful to get familiar with VAWA. And I do have a link here that takes you straight to the most updated policy. It also expanded to include broader, to include more definitions of domestic violence, including economic abuse. So just as a federal housing provider, really understanding those VAWA guidelines can be helpful. And so that's it for me. I really appreciate all the work that you do, and I always look forward to collaborating. We can provide training really on anything related to this topic. Feel free to reach out anytime, and here's my contact information right there. And I would be happy to take any questions.
Rachel, I have a question. Sorry.
Sure.
When you said ROI, do you have a specific ROI, or would our agency ROI suffice?
Yes. So your internal release of information will suffice to be able to provide information out in the community. If you're working with a crisis center, we have our own confidentiality. So the survivor would basically have to sign a release with both of our agencies for us to communicate. So they would have to sign one like with, let's just say Concord Crisis Center of New Hampshire, and then whichever agency you're working with.
And Rachel, not to overstep,
Yeah.
But in working with both the coalition and the crisis centers through their rapid rehousing project, the member agencies of the coalition prefer to reach out to the participant and get that release signed if possible, because they have that relationship with the participant. Mm-hmm. And really want to make sure that the participant is okay with signing the release for other agencies to interact with outside parties.
Yeah.
And there's one question in the chat from Kelly. If one has an eviction due to a domestic violence situation, is the victim penalized for this? Kelly, I'm asking where you think they would be penalized in regards to an eviction status.
Well, mine would be like if somebody were to cause damage to, say, the apartment or whatever, because a person got violent and if they went and applied for somewhere else, could that be used against the person that did not cause the damage? Obviously, they didn't cause it, but it was the perpetrator that caused it. How do you deal with a situation like this when applying for housing?
Yeah, so it can be really helpful in those circumstances if there is a police report that like identifies the circumstances. But also there, as a person is a survivor, and they did not, you know, they're not asking basically to be a victim. That in cases like that, it could be a discrimination issue. So I would really reach out to the 603 Legal Aid Fair Housing team in that circumstance, so that way they may be able to advocate or with a potential landlord or housing agency, because again, survivors are a protected class. So denying eviction based on the fact that somebody experienced violence, will may fall into that category.
Kelly, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. I just was curious because there are some people that I have encountered that worry about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it could be really hard for landlords to to fully understand. So I think that advocacy is important, but thank you for that question.
Does anyone else have any other questions? We will share with the entire Balance of State membership the Balance of State emergency transfer plan. We will send that out with the notes so all of you can see that and see what it says. It's really a policy around if there is an individual or family who believes there's an imminent threat of harm from further violence if they remain at the same unit. It provides protections and assistance in order to move that household or participant into another unit so that they are safe. So we will include that emergency transfer plan that was developed by the Balance of State with the notes for this meeting. Anyone have any other questions for Rachel? You're all quiet today. All right. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Cindy from Stratford County Community Action Program. Cindy is going to talk about the Coordinatory Domestic Violence Project that is Balance of State wide. They serve participants throughout the Balance of State geography who are fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence and are also at risk of or experiencing homelessness. So she's going to talk about that project and how it intersects with coordinated entry. Cindy, I'm hoping you can share your presentation, or I will.
Hope so too. I sent it to you just in case, because sometimes I'm not a technological wizard. Okay,
Me neither.
can you all
That's
see
what
it?
my kids are for.
Yes, exactly. That's what one of my coworkers is for. Can you see the screen now?
Yes. So
Okay.
the Coordinatory Domestic Violence Project, I think it's been 2 or 3 years now, Cindy.
I think this is the third year.
So we're currently in the third year of this project that was awarded by HUD through the Notice of Funding Opportunities. And we have seen some, thanks to the hard work of Stratford County CAP, some significant increases in people utilizing this project and some positive exits to permanent housing destinations, and just the support and assistance that this project is providing to those specific people within this population. And I will let Cindy take it away.
Thank you. So some of this I may skip through because this a lot of you already know some of this information. So let's get to the second screen. Oh, good. It's not going. Okay, there we go. So I believe everyone here should know what coordinated entry is. So we will skip this. Rachel went over a lot of the domestic violence, so that is very helpful. I always like to remind people that it's not just the physical violence that is domestic violence, and that it's typically a pattern of coercive behavior to gain power and control. It's not just what most people would think of as an assault. So physical violence, sexual violence, stalking, emotional, financial, and it's rarely a one-time occurrence. Um, the people that would qualify for our project would be, and Christy gave a good intro to this, individual or family who's currently fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence and is homeless or at risk of homelessness due to this. I do have some examples later, I think in the next slide that might help. Because a lot of times people will come in and you will not know whether they are appropriate for our project or not. First of all, we're happy to get the referrals and reach out and either work with you to get some more information or with the client. But what it looks like would be if they're leaving their home, wherever they consider home, which could certainly be a homeless encampment, due to safety, but they have no other place to go. They're attempting to leave a violent relationship and they have no resources or support systems. And if the abuser is no longer in the home, but the survivor is still facing homelessness. Because as Rachel mentioned, a lot of the domestic violence focuses around financial. And so often the abuser may be removed, but the survivor has no way to continue staying in that home, and they will be homeless imminently. So what it doesn't look like is if a client is being evicted, but they are also a survivor of a previous DV incident, but they're not currently at risk of harm or actively encountering abuse. That would go more towards just the regular regional access points. Or if the abuser is no longer in the home and they don't feel like they're in danger, but they're looking for other housing for other reasons. They have to be fleeing or attempting to flee, homeless, or facing homelessness at this time. Not sure why this is so, there we go. Sorry about this one's a little bit small, but the flow chart of how this typically works is a survivor discloses that they're fleeing or attempting to flee and at risk or facing homelessness, and they are provided with the contact information for their local victim service provider, so anyone in the coalition. Often people are referred to us first, which is fine, but if they are currently actively fleeing, what they need more is the support and the safety aspect from their local domestic violence agency so that they can safely flee. Then the next step would be to either have them call 211 or any partner agency at all can refer them to our option. And what you do first was get their permission to participate in the coordinated entry system. If you are an agency that works with that, you could do the prevention diversion tool and then make the referral to us. If they go through 211, 211 typically does the prevention diversion tool and then sends the referral to us. Once we get the referral, we would reach out to the survivor within 24 hours. We try to contact them multiple times with any way that's provided. So if it's a phone number, an email, we will try any of those ways. It's very important, like Rachel said, to make sure that this is safe for us to be doing so. So when you are getting their information, make sure it's safe for us to reach out and leave messages and texts and emails because we never want to put someone in more danger by reaching out for help. If we do not hear back from them after these multiple contacts, we would basically close that referral until we hear from them again because it's not safe to continue to try and do that in this situation. Once contact is made, we would assess the situation through a lot of the things that Rachel was talking about, having conversation with them about what's been happening, where they've been staying, if this is the first time they've tried to leave, what's happened before when they've tried to leave, so to sort of assess, their safety and what kind of shelter or supports that we can offer them. We supply them, because we cover the whole balance of state, we try to supply them with whatever resources we know throughout the state. We have a sheet for each county so that they can access any resources there. We can help them reach out to any shelters to see if that's something that they need, any other basic needs that they immediately need. We also, throughout this time working with them, would complete the coordinated entry assessment and place them on the prioritization list if that's appropriate. If for some reason we get a referral that is not currently fleeing or attempting to flee, or is not homeless or facing homelessness, then we would do a warm handoff to their regular regional access point, or any other service that might be more appropriate for them. Sorry, I'm not really sure how that went down there. So how to make a referral to us is you can have them call 211. You can email or call us at the numbers provided on this screen. And you can also, a lot of the agencies use the referral form that we have made, which sort of gives an easier way for you to put all the information down. And it's a good reminder to make sure you have their permission and if their texting is safe and if their calling is safe and things like that. So if you ever need one of those, I can certainly provide that. Most of the coalition agencies have access to one already. One thing that we try to make clear to the people that we're working with is that there's a difference between working with their local crisis center and working with us. Our focus is on housing and on providing them with resources and connections in the community. But obviously, it's their choice if they want to work with a crisis center, but we always try to provide them with information about why it could be helpful. The crisis center would have the things that are on the screen, the 24-hour confidential support, helping them with protective orders, safety planning. As Rachel mentioned, they have their own housing programs that also we can work in conjunction with. They can accompany them to the police or to the hospital or child advocacy, whatever is needed. Those are not services that we provide in the domestic violence coordinated entry program. Ours is really focused more on housing and resources and connections. So this is just the map that I use every single day to tell me where everything is while we're trying to serve the state. This is the map of the crisis centers that we work with throughout the state. So the things that we do, so we are the regional access point for the balance of state. Sometimes clients are referred to their regular regional access point, and at that point they determine that they might, be served better by working with us, and they're asked if they would like to be transferred to us. Sometimes they come straight to us. We get referrals from lots of different agencies. Most of the crisis centers, 211, what I like to call a self-referral is when someone just emails and says, someone told me to call you. We get a lot through our website at CAP. And so any way that they come in is fine. We provide trauma-informed case management for housing and supportive services. We collaborate with all the crisis agencies. We connect them to local resources. Sometimes we can provide advocacy if they're struggling to work with any agency that they're just having a hard time getting hold of them or having a hard time communicating with them. Or maybe the agency just isn't quite aware of the barriers they're facing by fleeing domestic violence. We can help with that. We definitely help them apply for any housing option that we can come up with. And one of the things too that we do is provide information. A lot of people that are currently fleeing, they have no idea what the difference is between a housing choice voucher and a housing authority and an income-based housing. And we can sort of help them understand that and figure out which ones that they are eligible for. We can provide immediate needs such as food, clothing, toiletries, and other necessities. And we can assist them with budgeting and developing a housing stability plan. Sorry, I didn't ask if anyone had questions. I was just going through my, so if you have questions, you can certainly ask me now. I'll leave this up on the screen for a minute. This is all of our phone numbers and our email. We're happy to answer questions anytime someone reaches out. Does anyone have any questions now about the program? The presentation was so good. No one has any questions?
Cindy, you're amazing. So what I will say, because I think all of you know me, but the Coordinator Domestic Violence Project started 3 years ago. We have seen a huge increase because of the education and marketing that Stratford County CAP has put out there within the community and to the regional access points and people accessing this project. Anyone who is fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence or is at risk of or experiencing homelessness, they have the option to work with the regional access point in their area or with the Coordinator Domestic Violence Project. We are allowed, because of HUD's rules, to have specific regional access points for specific populations. But again, it really is client-centered, and we are looking at where does the client want to be served? What options do they want to have? Do they want to be served through Southwestern Community Services because they know the staff there? Are they fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence and want to work with Strafford County CAP? So it's really up to the participant to decide which way they want to go in order to work with our coordinated entry system to get prioritized for housing. We also have the same situation set up for youth as well. We have several youth navigator. Sorry, my Alexa's talking. We have several projects set up just specifically for youth in order for specific providers to provide assistance to youth navigating our homeless services network.
There are also specific rapid rehousing programs that are just for people that are fleeing domestic violence or human trafficking, but the clients that we place on the prioritization list are eligible for any of the rapid rehousing openings, but the specific ones are very helpful because sometimes our clients have the same barriers, and the questions on the assessment do apply to them. And sometimes we have people who have not faced any of those barriers, but they are very unsafe and fleeing domestic violence. So it's helpful to have those rapid rehousing projects that focus on that.
And just to expand on that, every single year through the Notice of Funding Opportunity, the NOFO that we do for the Balanced State Continuum of Care, we apply for whatever funding HUD has an opportunity for. We currently have a domestic violence rapid rehousing project through Merrimack County. Soon, and we also have the New Hampshire Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence rapid rehousing, which is balanced statewide. We were recently awarded projects through, I call it CCC, the Concord Crisis Center of Central New Hampshire. We'll be starting a rapid rehousing domestic project this year, as we were just awarded it. We are also awarded a project for Strafford County CAP, which will be balance of statewide to provide rapid rehousing services to people fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence who are also at risk of or experiencing homelessness. So we are working on building up those opportunities for this specific population. And there are options for them. They're also eligible for any of the continuum of care projects that we have out there, because you either have to meet either category 1 or category 4 of the homeless definition from HUD to be able to enter into a continuum of care project. Anyone has any questions about that? HUD is continuing to offer projects for specific populations, specifically unsheltered, those fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, and the youth experiencing homelessness. So we will see those opportunities for funding moving forward. If anyone has any questions, you can email me directly.
Christy, there is a question in the chat.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Christy. I'm going to let Rachel answer this question, but it is, how do you get help with getting an advocate when someone has to go to court?
Yes, Kelly. So all of the crisis centers do have advocates, court advocates that are able to connect survivors with legal resources and also provide advocacy in court. So with an issue like what you have experienced comes up, this is an example of where you can certainly reach out to the coalition and we can kind of do a little, deeper digging to see, what may have occurred there. But there should be a court advocates available to be present at restraining order hearings, as well as divorce or child child custody kind of ex parte orders. Again, we're not lawyers, but we are there to provide support and can connect to legal services. So I'm sorry that that was an experience that your client had. So please feel free to reach out to myself anytime something like that pops up.
And I just want to jump in too. If we're working with a client that is not working with a crisis center, this isn't a service that we can provide, but it is a way for us to talk to them about why it's important to connect with a crisis center. And sometimes we will even go with them, or sometimes I will meet with them at the crisis center so I can connect them all together. Because sometimes if they've started to trust us working with them, it can help sort of join them to the right organization to help them with the other things.
And just to add to that too, so our crisis centers have relationships with all of our courts, and there's usually a DV point of contact at the courts. Sometimes we do find that they usually call us when somebody comes forward to fill out a protective order, and sometimes it's also a matter of training for that court staff. So just to give a little background too, a person can access legal services. Court services by walking into a crisis center, or potentially through walking into court and asking to speak to an advocate. But any issues that may arise, feel free to reach out.
Thank you.
Anyone have any other questions? You can either put it in the chat or raise your hand or start talking. So as I'm not seeing any other questions, we will move on to the last part of this presentation for the balanced state. I'd like to introduce Bethany Cottrell, who works with Bridges House of Hope. They have a rapid rehousing project that is specifically to serve those who are fleeing or attempting to flee human trafficking, which is funded through our Continuum of Care. So I will let Bethany take it away.
Thank you, Christy. Can you all see that slideshow? Okay, awesome. So I'm Bethany Cottrell. Thank you so much for having me back today to talk about Bridget's House of Hope. I am excited. This is my first presentation to announce that I am only using the term founder. And we have our new full-time executive director, Miranda Lane. Well, she'll be full-time hopefully by the end of this month, on the call today as well. So we're excited at Bridget's House as we talk about some of the updates and changes. But looking forward at sustainability, our agency truly, as many of you know, needs a full-time executive director to manage our full-time staff, so that way we can start accepting more referrals and supporting those who have been trafficked or exploited in our area, and manage some of our wait lists as well. And so when we're talking about Bridget's House, Bridget's House of Hope is a safe house which provides housing services for victims and survivors of human trafficking and exploitation. And our goal really is that full support of care and coordination of services for those experiencing or having experienced trafficking. We have grown our program in the year and a half, almost 2 years that we've been open. But to see a little bit of our history, we've been a part of the task force here in New Hampshire since its inception. We received funding in 2022 to open our safe house here in New Hampshire. And so it's been quite the ride and journey through COVID and everything else, as many of you are aware and have seen. But we know that here in New Hampshire, it has been a gap in services and a need. And many people were saying, you know, why? Why did we open Bridget's House? Where did this come from? And being a part of the Balance of State COC and also the task force for many years prior to opening Bridget's, we would often be saying, you know, how do we help? What are we doing with these survivors? Because they were choosing homelessness. They were going back to their exploitation or their trafficking situations in order to avoid homelessness or avoid going to a situation that may have been worse. And we kept hearing over and over again that housing was our biggest concern, as many of you know, having these discussions in these meetings and presentations often. And so a few of us said, well, what are we going to do about it? Because we're really tired of hearing that. And this was before we had all of this funding through the Continuum of Care to assist with rapid rehousing, and before really housing was funded like it should be, sort of should be in New Hampshire, or sort of funded, I should say. We're still making those strides. And so that's really where this stemmed from, was quite a few of us in those two groups getting together and saying, let's start a nonprofit, because this is something that we definitely need to focus on. And so in 2022, like I said, that is when we were able to start accepting clients. Currently, we have 3 clients in our physical location and 6 clients in the community receiving rental assistance and ongoing case management through rapid rehousing and other voucher programs. My favorite statistic to give, although that is a good one, to say that we're working with 9 clients, and in the past year and a half, we've worked with almost 20 survivors in New Hampshire and coming from surrounding areas. That's a lot. That's a lot in our small state. That's a lot for the referrals that we see. And I can promise you, at least once a week, we're getting another request for housing and for services, and having to put people on a wait list, because the need is great, as we all know. So with those 9 clients that we're currently working with, we also are supporting 4 cats and 4 dogs as well. And so I find that an important statistic to share, because as we know, many shelters do not allow pets to be a part of that program. And also a lot of apartments are really hard to find that also allow animals. And many of our clients will either choose living in a campground, homelessness, or living in an unsafe situation before they would give up their animals. And so it was something that as staff and a board, we said this needs to happen. And so I always find that interesting, and I have more information about it later, but I'd like to start with it. And so people will say to me, what is human trafficking? And I think, we've grown in the professional world and even in our community to be able to talk about what it is and to understand it. But I can remember back when we first started talking about Bridget's House and doing interviews with a local paper. And one of the reporters said to me, don't worry, I watched the movie Taken last night. I did my homework. I know what trafficking is. And I was like, meh, that's not at all what we do. That's not what we're seeing here in New Hampshire, but we are seeing exploitation and we are seeing trafficking. That is a crime through of exploitation of a person for labor, services, or commercial sex through force, fraud, or coercion. That's the definition. I have to say, I stumble over it every time, because it's a lot of words and it's a lot of definitions within there that we would have to look at. And so it's hard for us to then work with clients to get them to identify as being a survivor of trafficking. Because if it's hard for us to even define what these words mean, exploitation, force, fraud, coercion, what's the difference between commercial sex, between labor, how can we expect that someone who has a trauma history, someone who has substance use disorder, someone who has a mental health diagnosis, someone who has been sexually assaulted or in a domestic violence relationship or has no supports or moved here from somewhere else in this country, how do we expect them to say, yes, I'm a survivor of trafficking? And so we really rely on our stakeholders, on our community partnerships, on groups like this, so that way when referrals are coming in, we can have those conversations. I talk with Cindy often, and many of you, to say, okay, what does fleeing trafficking really mean and really look like? And it's more about having those conversations than it is about being able to check a box. And so, what does it present as? It presents as prostitution. It presents as someone living in a home share, maybe. So when it comes to prostitution, commercial sex that we're seeing where people are going out on the streets or going into homes of others and being forced to provide sex acts to maintain their opioid addiction. It's the only way that their boyfriend or their partner will give them their drugs or some of the money that came from that. They're not getting all of the money. They're not making that choice on their own free will. They're being told to get back out there and to make that money and to do what's needed. And then maybe they'll be allowed to live at sort of a status quo. We're seeing a lot of referrals regarding domestic servitude. So what might look like a home share. People can't afford rent. They can't afford to live on their own. It's hard for anyone, even in professional roles that are making a standard wage, to be able to afford the rents that we're seeing here in New Hampshire, as we know. And so we're seeing, I'd have to say, out of the last 4 referrals, 3 of them were clients who moved into a home of someone to help either take care of their farm or their animals or to help take care of the house itself. And then those people that they were living with started saying, well, you used our internet and the electric and you ate some of the food and you have your room. So you actually expensed and cost us, $1,500 this month, but you only worked in the farm for 10 hours or whatever it may be. And we've seen spreadsheets. We've had people, have clients report that there were very detailed sort of invoices done, and they were never getting any of that money. They were supposed to be working to get paid and then living there as part of that agreement. But none of that money was ever given to them. So then they can't get out. They can't get a security deposit. They can't, even put the money down for an electric for the initial for utilities. And so that would be that exploitation of labor as well. And so it's really showing its ugly head in many different ways here in New Hampshire. And I think the more that we can talk about what we're seeing and what some of those experiences may have been, the easier it's going to be to start identifying, so that way then others can identify and self-identify as well. Many of the myths that we hear is that it's only affecting adult women. It's very sensationalized that that's what's happening and that's where it's happening, but we know that's not the case. We know that there are males, we know there are transgendered, we know that it can really be happening anywhere. Also, people are saying, some of the myths that we believe, especially through watching movies and different TV shows, is that violence is always involved. The interesting one to me, this third one here, I spent a lot of my career working in the Child Advocacy Center model back when we first started talking about human trafficking and what did it mean. And we used to always say it's mobile sexual assault, right? It's coming across state lines. It's like going from different counties, and then no, we were wrong, right? We learned a lot through all of that. It doesn't require travel or transportation across borders. And I think that's where some of that definition comes in. But I think back, when we first started talking about this, that's what we really thought, is that there had to be some sort of transportation, whether it be across state lines or across country borders, and that's not the case, and that it doesn't happen here in our community. People think all the time there's no way in a small state that's safe like New Hampshire that this is happening. But what we know is that this can really be happening to anyone, again, regardless of age, gender, or race. The clientele, the referrals that we receive are from all over. That many of them the majority of them are from here in New England, so it can be happening here. It happens in our community. We have seen referrals from transgender, from gender neutral and gender fluid. We have seen male referrals. We have seen female referrals. We've seen referrals around youth as well, which we have to refer those out at this time. So it's anywhere and can be happening to anyone. And we know that it's not always involving violence. It could have some violence at some point. It could start that way, but most of our traffickers are using psychological tactics. Many of you may have seen Jasmine Grace do her presentation on surviving trafficking in the New England, Massachusetts, mainly in Maine area, but in the New England area. And her trafficker put her through college to get her degree to be a bookkeeper and to do office management. So that way she could then run the strip club and the trafficking business that he had going. And so there was this tie there. There was this like, you need me, but also how can I leave because you've paid for all of this schooling? And, you know, and I feel tied to that I owe you something. And sometimes that can be even larger and even more controlling and detrimental to many of these clients. And that's the hard part. Those are the pieces that it takes a long time, as many of you know, to overcome and to then support many of these clients as they transition into independence, right? That's always our goal. But we also feel very strongly that case management and the support that we provide doesn't have an end date, because many people go through this process at a different pace. Many of them, once they get into a rapid rehousing program, sort of, you know, revert back to some of their old behaviors where they're or their old trauma triggers because they're now living on their own again. And so it's important for us to be there and to be able to support them. And so knowing that human trafficking is not human smuggling, doesn't require transportation or moving across those borders, as we said. But we do know that it's happening globally as well. And so the amount of trafficking that we're seeing globally is astronomical, but it's also very much related similarly here in New Hampshire. Between local law enforcement, Homeland Security, and the collaborative task force, trafficking has been identified in all 10 counties, from the northern tip of Coos County down to, you know, Hillsborough County and Manchester, Nashua, you know, out in Portsmouth as well. These numbers have been hard. And so I'm sure if anyone from the task force, some of my numbers are older because it's been hard to identify, like, what are we seeing for referrals and what is coming in? And I know there's been a lot of work around that. You know, I always find it interesting because we've been identifying it for a long time. I grew up in Hudson, New Hampshire, which is right next to Litchfield. And I can remember every, you know, spring or summer, the migrant workers coming in, and, you know, you knew it was almost time for the farms to open because there'd be pickup trucks driving down 3A, and everyone would be sitting in the back of the truck. You know, they'd have the workers going back and forth. There was a house on one of the farm properties that everyone, like, there was probably like 15 or 20 people that lived in there. And it was sort of part of like our community, but we never really understood what was fully happening. And come to find out, one of the first cases that was prosecuted in New Hampshire was in Litchfield at a tree farm. And, you know, I look back and think, why didn't we ask the questions? Why didn't we try and figure it out more? Why did we just accept that as normal when really people's lives are in danger? And that's why it's important that we're all here and still talking about it, because although it may be hard to identify it, or maybe hard for people to self-report, the more we can be talking about it, the better it's going to be for them to be supported throughout this process. And so through Bridget's House, where are we now? We're still working on our grants and fundraising and growing through our rapid rehousing program. I think we were a little bit ahead of the curve, I have to say, nationally, because we have our initial OVC, Office of Victims of Crime grant that supports our physical location. And when I worked with Christy and Melissa around adding the rapid rehousing program, we thought, you know, this is really going to help people as they transition to independence, and assist with some of the waitlist problems we see when you have one physical location. And I started to have conversations with the Office of Victims of Crime grant supporters, the project managers there, and they said that across the country, people were starting to see that the independent rental assistance case management process is what is working well and what is working better, because people are able to, as we always say, build their tribe with our staff and with our support, but then actually be building that tribe in the community too, and not continuing to have those transitions and having to build their roots there. And so it's exciting to see that, because I think a lot of the grants that were initially looking at how do we support this one brick and mortar space are now saying, how do we support these survivors and where they're at and get them in the community, because that's how they're going to be most successful. And so that's really exciting as we're seeing that with our rapid rehousing program and continuing to grow that as well. We're continuing to collaborate with our community partners and agencies And those of you on this call that we work with are probably so excited to hear that we'll have a full-time ED. So that way she'll be able to communicate with you during your normal business hours, and you won't be waiting for me to respond to emails after hours. And so that is really exciting to be able to continue to build those relationships, continuing to build that residential program model, identifying, you know, we've been open and accepting clients now for you know, for almost 2 years, which is wild to think about. It also feels like a lifetime. But to be able to look back and say, okay, what have we heard? We have residents who have transitioned. We've been able to talk with them and say, through your life experiences, what worked well, what hasn't worked well, what do you think could be changed? We're able to have those conversations with the clients that are in the program to say, you know, what do you need? For example, one of the things when we first started was that we wanted to have a 24/7 staffed program. You know, when I'm sitting at my dining room table and reading research, it sounds great to say that that's what works best. And then when we implemented that, clients were saying it feels like a group home. It feels like when I was when I was under DCYF, or when I was in care and, you know, I was in a group home, or when I was in a hospital for, you know, mental health concerns. And, you know, it felt very triggering. And so we were able to dial some of that back and say, okay, how can we build your independence, give you that lifeline and that safety net so you're still being supported, but not making you feel like someone's looking over your shoulder every second, and not making you feel exploited again, all over again, you know, not controlling everything that happens during the day. Because if we're trying to build that support for independence, that's what we need to continue focusing on. And continuing to build our relationships with our business and faith partnerships, because we know that, again, as our clients are building that community, they need to have those supports. They need to be getting jobs. They need to be finding where if they have a faith group, then what is that faith group and how can they partner with them, and how can we get them into that community that would be most supportive for them. When we talk about our location, the physical program itself, it's 4 2-bedroom apartments, mainly female residents that are there and their animals. Intensive case management. Like I said, we've recently changed that 24/7 staffing. And we see most of our clients are there about 18 to 24 months before they transition into independence. Our rapid rehousing program is just over 7 units. We currently have 5 people in the rapid rehousing program, 6 people in the community, and looking to grow that as our staffing stables out. So we're excited for that. We work really hard, obviously, on confidentiality, similar to the crisis centers. Our location is private, and so we want to ensure that confidentiality of the location itself. We also utilize PO boxes and our address confidentiality program for both those in the physical location, and then also for those in the community, if that is something that they would like to continue using, and really assisting in keeping them anonymous, ensuring that they have that safety that they need as they transition to independence and build their future goals. These are some pictures of prior to there being any furniture in there. We're going to promise you that that's not what this looks like anymore, because we're cleaning everything and trying to reorganize. But I like to show this because the space that we have, they renovated the entire building, and, you know, many of our clients say it's the best apartment I've ever had, or it's the best space I've ever been in. But, you know, we don't want anyone to have to worry about it. We don't want anyone to have to worry about, do I have to get toilet paper or milk this week? That shouldn't be their concern. Their concern should be, am I safe? Do I have a safe place to live? And then how do we continue moving forward with that? You know, because many times as we all know, the level of trauma, but especially with our trafficking survivors, it's so complex. It's such an onion. And every time you peel one layer back, you know, you find 10 more. So it's important to try and keep some of the other pieces there still consistent. And so for our referrals, although I said we have a wait list, which we do, we're really working to get the staffing to a place so we can start accepting more of those in. You can email the info@bridgetshouseofhope.org email address. That goes right now to both Miranda and myself. And as we continue with our staffing, that will go to other staff too. You'll be able to connect with the executive director and have that initial intake discussion. To our board and our program development and our program committee, in my background in the CAC world, it was really important to us that there be this sort of discussion, right? The discussion with the survivor and the community partner that maybe they're currently working with. When I first started talking about Bridget's House, I was working with Homeland Security, and we were at Franklin Hospital working with a patient that was there who was nonverbal and came in nonverbal and pretty much catatonic, and slowly over time started to speak. And I had applications for her for housing. And the first question on both of them was, are you a survivor of trafficking, checkbox, or exploitation, checkbox? And we never got past that. We never got to her name. We never got to her address. She could not identify what her box was, right? We put so many people in boxes all the time. And I think that's the biggest thing. These are humans. These are family members, they're friends, they're neighbors. And so if we don't have to have someone put themselves in a box again, we can have that conversation between them and whoever their current community supports are. It's only going to make it better as we move forward with these referrals. And so I think that that is really an important part for us, is that, yep, we have a form online. Yes, we, accept emails. Yes, we're going to ask questions, but it's the conversation that helps us figure out where someone's at. Are they going to work it well in a program like this? Are they ready to better themselves and to work towards independence? And are we going to be the right fit there? There is an assessment to assess, are they a survivor of trafficking? So that way we can understand, are we working with the right population? There are amazing people in this state who work with survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. And there's a long list of people that are trying to get into those services, right? So we want to make sure we're staying in our lane and wearing our right hats, and we can support each other when we can. But for the most part, we're working with those survivors of trafficking, so that way the experts on the other side can be working with DV and sexual assault. We do that intake interview. We have a team house discussion, and then plan that intake and move-in plan throughout this process. And then really looking at, what is the case management? What are those needs? One of the most powerful moments for me in this process was years ago. There used to be a annual conference training at the Bethany Church in Greenland, the Faith Justice Summit. And one day one of the sessions, they had a survivor get on stage, and she listed off all of the community services and community supports that she worked with. And she, talked about rental assistance. She talked about utility assistance and the church and her therapist and her case manager for Medicaid, and the list went on and on. By the time she was done, there were 13 people standing on stage with her. That means 13 phone numbers, 13 email addresses, 13 appointments to try and schedule and coordinate, 13 people that somehow had an effect on her daily living or her weekly living that she had to try and organize. And I don't know about you, but I can't live without my phone and my calendar. And even then I'm dropping the ball or forgetting something, or, what was I going to get for groceries or whatever it is. How can we expect people who are constantly in fight or flight, who have lived their entire lives like that, whose brains are completely different, as we talked about, as the coalition talked about in the first session, their brain structure is different because of this trauma. How can we expect them to facilitate and coordinate calls and life conversations with 13 people? And so that's really, when we're talking about case planning and case management, it's about how can we help people manage that? Not how can we do it all? We can't do it all. There are already experts doing it. But how can we manage, the work with those different community partners, the work with those agencies and those needs and those next steps, and help really try and put it in a package to say, okay, here's step one, and then next week we'll do 2A, B, and C, right? What does that look like, and how can we help set them up for success so then that can continue moving forward? We are so thankful, I keep saying this, but relying on the work with our community partners, working with Dartmouth Hitchcock, the Continuum of Care. We work really closely with Lamprey Healthcare. They've been fantastic. And community mental health centers in the area. We also recently have started a partnership with Goodwin Family Health, Home Care for Homeless, the crisis centers, and then Bless This Home is a great nonprofit. If you're not familiar with them, anytime someone moves into a new apartment, we work with them, and they completely furnish and decorate the entire apartment for them based on a survey that our clients fill out. So they get to pick what they want and their colors and their needs, and then they get to move into an apartment that's fully furnished, and all of that then becomes theirs that they get to keep. And many of them have never owned a mattress, have never owned a coffee pot. And now this is theirs to take with them if they move out and go to a new apartment. So we're very thankful for that partnership as well. Here's some of our contact information. You are more than welcome to email me, but I can promise you Miranda will be more responsive. But I am still here and trying. But we, are just very thankful for this group and for the work that everyone here does. And I can put these email addresses in the chat as well. Any questions?
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat as of yet. The only thing I will follow up with is that this is the only project that we have in the state of New Hampshire that specifically serves those fleeing or attempting to flee human trafficking. And I think most of you know that when we go through the coordinated entry system and part of doing the New Hampshire coordinated assessment tool, we do ask that question if they're fleeing or attempting to flee human trafficking, so that we can make appropriate referrals to this project to house those survivors who need assistance. They currently serve 7 households and about maybe 10 people, give or take. And again, it is the only project that we have throughout the entire state that serves this specific population. All of the referrals do go through the coordinated entry system. And if we cannot find anyone who's fleeing or attempting to flee human trafficking, we do look at those fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence as well.
I do have to say though, Chrissy, it's been interesting, right? Because you go back to like putting people in boxes and the trauma-informed conversation we had, and everyone has a laundry list of diagnoses, and how frustrating is it every time they have to write it out. And so we've had a couple referrals who are fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence. But when you talk to them, right, it goes back to that conversation. In my brain, I'm like, no, this is definitely exploitation. You've been being trafficked. But I don't want to say it because I don't want to give them another label, another box that they have to live in. But it just, the things that people do to survive oftentimes fall more under other labels. And I think that's on us as professionals to talk about and to identify and address without making someone feel like they have to be a survivor of something else or a victim of something else.
I completely agree with you. We really look at trying to match the right participant with the right project and not put another label on them, but make sure that we're matching them with the appropriate services throughout the balance of state so that they're housed and they get the services that they need to move forward and maintain that permanent housing option that we are able to provide, hopefully.
And I think that's one of the things through the rapid rehousing, and some of the crisis centers probably see this in some of their shelters, is that when you're doing rapid rehousing and people are in the community, there's less of a comparison. Well, how'd you get here? What was your referral, right? Like when in the home, in the tangible physical location, there's more opportunities for that, where people are like, oh, well, you're just a victim of DV. And I'm like, whoa. That's not what we're doing here. So I think it just goes to show why rapid rehousing and the support through the COC and through the Bureau of Housing Supports, which I know is not the right label anymore. I'm sorry, someday I'm going to say the right one, is so important, because I think our profession as a whole is becoming more trauma informed, but that is why we see such success with programs like this.
I'd just like to say too, if you are questioning whether someone is fleeing domestic violence or fleeing human trafficking, or which one are they, what should I check up, reach out to one of us, because I do this every day. And I can't tell you how many times I've reached out to Bethany to say, can I just run this by you? Because it feels a little like human trafficking, but I'm not quite sure. It's better if you, reach out and figure it out, than have somebody miss an opportunity. So, or have somebody there's nothing worse than someone being in, we had a referral once that said domestic violence. It was not domestic violence. And then having to not take away an opportunity from someone and redirect them somewhere else is terrible. And so, reach out to us if you have a question, if you're just not sure.
Thank you, Cindy. I will say we are very, very lucky within our continuum of care to have these very specialized projects for those fleeing human trafficking, domestic violence. We have specific youth projects. We are very, very lucky to be able to focus on specific populations and provide the services that they need through a lens, whether it's trauma informed, whether it's for the youth that we are serving, but we are very lucky to have all of these projects to be able to serve those at risk of or experiencing homelessness. Does anyone have any questions for Rachel from the coalition, Bethany from Bridges House of Hope, or Cindy from Sheffield County CAP? All right. If we don't have any other questions, or if you have questions afterwards, please feel free to email me and I'll drop my email in the chat. And I know Bethany put her information in there, and I can share Cindy's and Rachel Duffy's information if that's okay with both of them. Rachel says yes. I would like to introduce Megan Rafferty from the Institute for Community Alliances. She's going to provide a point in time update for the Balanced Estate Continuum of Care.
Still morning, right? Good morning.
Yes,
Can you hear
still
me?
morning.
Okay. So this is just a really quick update. Right now, all the HMIS point in time reports have been confirmed. And we are waiting on, I believe it's 3 housing inventory chart reports to be confirmed. And then for anything that was entered into the Google Forms, ICA will be working with BHS to review, clean that data, and then get it all aggregated so we can combine it with the HMIS data. We do not have a point in time due date. Historically, it's been the end of April. We don't even have HDX 2.0 available to enter the point in time or HIC yet. Hopefully sometime this month that will happen. So we're not, and this is a new process. We've always entered it into what is called HDX, the HUD data exchange. And there's a newer version of that, that's the 2.0, where we have always entered the longitudinal system analysis. This year, new was putting in the system performances in the 2.0, and it will also be new for the point in time and housing inventory chart. So we are hoping that they open that very, very soon, so we can at least get familiar with it. And thank you to everyone for your point in time. HMIS especially, because we've been able to confirm that. And we also thank those that entered unsheltered, and for anyone who entered their emergency shelter into the Google Forms. We really appreciate that. This is very important for the COC. It's the only time we have all the data together, because most of the time it's just the HMIS data. So this is very important for the COC. Thanks.
Thank you, Megan. And I just want to follow up to say that a lot of the data from the count in January for the point in time and the housing inventory count is used during our notice of funding opportunity for the Continuum of Care competition. So a lot of this data goes in, and that's how we get scored on our overall Continuum of Care system performance and how we're doing. So I really appreciate everyone and all of the hard work that went into the point in time count planning, because I know there's so many of you on here, even just from our staff who worked really, really hard to make sure that we had a really good point in time count this year. I can see Rob waving. We do have final numbers from the FY 2023 point in time count, which I believe have been shared with all of you. But if you haven't gotten that information, I did drop that email, my email, in the chat, so I can send that out to you. We are working on getting it up on the Bureau of Homeless Services website as well. Anyone have any questions about the point in time count or the housing inventory count? They're awful quiet today. All right. The only last thing that I will say is that we did, and Melissa sent out last week, we received our FY 2023 Notice of Funding Opportunity scores for our Continuum of Care competition. And I think you all saw that we were awarded all 6 of the projects that we applied for. So we're very, very excited. We applied for an expansion of coordinated entry to include the last remaining county that we cover and fund them, which was Western Rockingham. We also applied to expand HMIS so that we can work on more data analysis of the data we have in HMIS. We received the Concord Crisis Center of New Hampshire Domestic Violence Rapid Rehousing Project, Concord Coalition Against Homelessness, to end homelessness, Permanent Supportive Housing Project was funded. We also received funding for a statewide domestic violence rapid rehousing project through the Community Action Program of Stratford County. And we also received funding for Waypoint in order for them to provide coordinated entry services to youth as well. I feel like I'm missing one and I don't know who it is. But we're very, very excited. We're hoping to get these projects up and going by the end of October. The only other thing that we want to bring up is we, as the collaborative applicant, the Bureau of Homeless Services is looking to revamp subcommittees, similar to what we did with the Balance of State Continuum of Care. A meeting list. Melissa recently updated that entire meeting list for the Continuum of Care. We will be working on updating all of the subcommittee email lists as well in order to ensure that we have the right people at the right tables so that we can move forward in ending homelessness, connecting people to permanent housing options, and really meeting the needs of what HUD expects from us each year through the NOFO. That's all I have. I don't know if anyone else has any other updates. Rob says no. All right, well, I am going to end the meeting and we will share the recording and post it on our website as soon as we humanly possibly can. And we will send that out to everybody. I also will include all of the PowerPoints from the 3 presenters today from the Coalition, Stratford County CAP, and from Bridges House so that you can all have access to those trainings as well. Thank you.
Thank you.